Divided cities. Sometime after the Third World War. It is the beginning of the week and we have to go to the yearly tests, where they decide if you would live on the ground or in a floating city. This test was done to each person once in their lives. Today was my test. I live in a floating city with my parents, but today can change my whole future. I got ready and headed to the reunion center, where they would pick us up to take us to the ground. These tests were all done on the government space. Since they divided us, it is really hard to go up and down. No one can enter the other city, just on special occasions like this one. My parents told me about a time where they all lived on the ground together, but I can't really imagine it. When we got to the ground, they divided us into different groups of 20. We were all the same age. They gave us hospital gowns and took each one to the testing room. After the tests, they took us to a common room. I sat on the table and got food served. We were all eating and started talking. There was this one girl. Her name is Lisa. I had never seen her, but she said she lived on a floating city. She was beautiful and had interesting opinions about the way we lived. After eating, a tall man in a doctor's gown walked into the common room with a folder. Everything went silent as they started calling our names and putting us into two different rooms. Lisa and I got divided. I wasn't sure what was happening, but I suspected it. My room was full of people about 10 minutes later. You could feel the tension when the tall man opened the door and closed it behind him. He intertwined his fingers in front of him. You will live on a floating city, he said. In that moment, it hit me. I would probably never see Lisa again. But why? What did these tests do? How do they decide who deserves to live in a floating city with the rich? I had so many questions, but I didn't get it. It made no sense. When I was talking to Lisa, she was great. I really thought she had more possibilities to stay in a floating city than me. She had this way of saying what she thought and wanting to make things better for everyone. I had to see her again. I had to figure out a way to go looking for her or figuring out why they moved her to the ground. Someone started guiding us to an exit and to the same place we arrived. They were taking us back to the floating city. We arrived, my parents were happily waiting for me. My dad had an important position in the government, but I had never been interested in that stuff until now. I had to ask him about the tests and how they divided us. Later that day, we were all eating dinner. I was trying to think of a way to get conversation in the direction I wanted. I couldn't be too blunt. I had to be careful with the topic because it's delicate. I started asking about their tests and if they had changed through time. They were telling me too little. I just had to ask and hope for the best. So Dad, how does this test actually work? How do you decide who lives where? My dad's face fell. I could tell he didn't know how to answer the question, but I really needed information. I'm just curious, no need to overreact. I tried to say with a laugh. I needed a conversation to loosen up, but my dad just stood up. There's things you don't need to know. Don't try to get this information. It will do no good, he said and left the dining room. I was sitting in my room thinking about the little information they gave me. I knew there was much more because of my dad's reaction. I just had to wait for my dad to leave his office so I could sneak in and check his computer. For my luck, my mom called my dad for some help, which meant he probably left his computer unlocked because he was going to return, but I didn't have a lot of time. Probably just enough to get the archives and documents onto my USB. I left my room and watched as my dad walked down the hall. When he was out of my sight, I grabbed my USB and ran into his office. The door was slightly open and as I suspected, the computer was unlocked. I inserted the USB and started copying the whole drive when I heard some footsteps. I didn't know what to do. This was my only opportunity to get the information fast. I didn't know where else to get it. I started thinking of excuses, but just when the door started creaking open, my mom called my dad again. I let out a sigh of relief and saw that the information was almost completely on my USB. I waited for a few more seconds and disconnected it. I left everything as it was and returned to my room. Later that night, I watched a movie with my parents and acted like everything was alright. My dad ignored that I ever asked a question about the tests and just continued as normal. I was feeling anxious because I hadn't had a chance to check the documents yet, but I wanted to wait until my parents were asleep. I had already been looking through the documents for about 2 hours and I wasn't getting anywhere, but there was still one folder that caught my attention. I tried to open it and there it was, the thing I had been looking for. It was a video of a man getting questioned by the same doctor that gave us our results. The man was saying he would expose the government and tell the truth about how they sent potential threats to their system to the ground. So we were actually divided by the conformists and the ones with initiative. This whole time, the ones on the ground, the ones we thought were the poor and the dumb, ones were actually the ones that had the power to change everything. I opened more documents and found letters and emails that said the same. I had the whole proof and I had to get it out. Now I only needed to find a way to get to the ground and find Lisa so we could make the whole thing public. We had been living like this for too long. It's only fair that we try to change it. There were only a few with access to the ground. Not even my dad with his important position could go down. I was trying to find a way down when it finally came to me. There was a garbage tunnel. We sent our whole trash down to the ground through it. It had to be big enough for one person, and it wasn't closed nor guarded because normally everyone wanted to stay in a floating city. No one wanted to end up on the ground. I had to go before my parents woke up. I packed my computer into my bag and stuffed a jacket in. I hung the USB on a chain around my neck and looked back one more time. I knew I wouldn't be seeing my room in a long time. I opened my window and jumped into the garden. On my way to the trash tunnel, I just hoped to not get my dad into trouble. I never thought he was a bad man. Maybe he just needed to see what the right thing was. Once I got in front of the tunnel, I just knew I had to jump in. If I delayed it, I would just end up regretting it. I put a chain with a USB into my shirt so it wouldn't come off, hugged my back, took a deep breath, and then just jumped in without looking back. I woke up and my whole body hurt. It wasn't dark anymore. I must have fainted from the impact to the ground. But I was here. I had made it. I went looking for Lisa through the streets. I had to find her as soon as possible. After looking for some time, I saw a group of people my age and recognized some from the tests. And when I got nearer, I saw her. She was standing in between the whole crowd. I grabbed her by the wrist. Lisa, I need to talk to you. This is important, I said lowly, just for her to hear. I could see shock and confusion all over her face, but she followed me. Once we were in a safe place with no one around, she started asking questions. What are you doing here? I thought they sent you back up. How will you go back? I stopped her and told her it was complicated. I told her she had to listen carefully and try to understand everything I was about to tell her. By the time I ended explaining and showed her the whole evidence, it was already nighttime. She processed the whole information pretty well and said that she actually felt something was wrong with those tests since before. We will fix this together, Lisa said while closing her hand tightly around mine. We knew we had to do something, and we knew we had to start something big. We just had to plan our next step.